Hello and welcome to my channel. Today I'll be taking a look at this module here, the Sump Pump by Robots of Red. I really have been enjoying using this module since I got it, really love it, and I thought as a first demo video on my channel I would take a closer look at this one because I think it brings a lot to the table when using it with a kick drum. And I haven't seen many videos of the kick drum being incorporated into this and how that can be used. I like techno, I like electronic music, and I was looking for a sidechaining module that you could change the shape of the envelope, which is this can. And when I saw this and I saw what it could do with the kick drum coming in, and my mind went, aha, kick drum going into that could be quite cool. This works really well, and when I say really well, I mean really well, and it makes some really interesting rhythmic patterns happen, and it doesn't just duck like a compressor or a VCA using an envelope such as this kick drum has, which I'll go into in a minute. It actually brings a lot more to the table. It's only 6 HP, and so it's small enough to incorporate into a skiff, and it's a rhythmic pattern generator, I suppose, at the same time as doing the side chaining, which I think is top quality, and it really is it's a proper techno-y kind of module. But that's beside the point, so that's what I will be doing today. As a bit of housekeeping, as you see, my hands are big. They're on this screen, like they cover the whole screen basically. So I will be stealing Bob's pencil. Bob has been sitting down with this pencil in him down below for the last couple of videos. He is looking after a space reserved for a WMD Scorpion that will be turning up, I hope, at Christmas time. I think that's what they've put on their website. Really looking forward to that one, and probably a video will be happening of that. But yeah, I've stolen Bob's pencil, and I'll be using this to point to the different modules during the video, so my hands are not so much in the way, and you can see what's going on. Second bit of housekeeping, yes, there is a bit of cardboard. You might see it here. That's just to put a little bit of shadow and shade over the LEDs here, because they are a little bit difficult to see because they're being washed out a bit by the lights I've got on, so you can see the fronts of the rest of the modules. Last thing, the controls in terms of controlling the sump pump, the threshold and floor control are right in the center. They do need adjusting to get the effects happening. So what I'll be trying to do is I've got a FAR fader bank down on my lower right out of shot, and that is plugged into the CV input here and the floor input on the white cable below the grey cable. And I'll be using the fader bank just to adjust the threshold and floor level during the video, because then my hands aren't in the way so much. The CV inputs are actually offset by the dials, so I might have to get into the video occasionally to adjust these dials, but I will also describe when I'm turning these up remotely, so you have a sense of what's actually going on during the video. As another side note, the attack and release control for the envelope on the circuit unfortunately aren't CV controllable, so I will have to go in to put my hand into the shot to adjust these during the video, but I will try to be as quick as possible and tell you if I'm turning them up and down, so you're aware of what's going on. So before I start the demo proper, let's just quickly look at the modules that I've got going on. As you can see, I have a pretty simple setup. If you wanted to try, if you got hold of the sump pump and you wanted to do the same thing, you could. These are quite common, I think, these modules, but you could substitute them for similar units of the same type and probably still get the same results. Yes, so you could probably do that. The envelope out of this module might be tricky, but you could use a mult split of the output level of the output of a kick module, a different kick module, and still get it to do the ducking control on the sump pump. That's not a problem, but you probably would need a mult to do that. But let's go to the modules themselves. So as you can see, we have a Euclidean Circles version 2 on the left here, a very common rhythmic generator module, the 6-channel 16-step Euclidean rhythmic generator by VPME.de. This will be putting a 4-pattern control into the kick module on channel 1. On channel 2, I'll be using this to inject a manual envelope trigger on the engage input, which is this orange cable just here, which I'm touching there. And the third channel I'll be using mid-video to show how a trigger put into the sidechain input on the envelope follower on the left channel of the sump pump, which is this black cable just under the orange, can sidechain a mono signal going into the right channel of the sump pump down here, which is this lower black cable down here. As you can see on the left of the sump pump, close left, we have our kick drum unit. And this is a very common one. This is the battering ram by Shackmat, an excellent kick drum module. A lot of people have it. A lot of people own it. A lot of people rave about it. I've seen. I really like it. A really good kick drum module. It has the benefit of having the external envelope out for the kick drum shape, which I will be using on this this pink cable here, sorry, going into the duck input of the sump pump. I won't be using it in invert mode. It will be in non-inverting mode for the entire video. As a quick side note, the sump pump ducking input is in inverted input. So whatever you put into this input, it will invert it in the sump pump. So you won't need to have anything that does the inversion externally to the sump pump itself, which is just a quick point. So that's the battering ram. To the right of the sump pump, we have the Batumi quad channel LFO generator, oscillator generator. This is the version 2, so it goes down. It goes up to audio rate output, so I can use it so we can hear a saw wave on into the sump pump as a input signal at the beginning of the video. You would have to find a LFO generator that has audio rate LFO if you wanted to substitute this for something else to do the similar thing with an LFO signal into the sump pump. Fourth unit, which is on the far right, which is just out of shot of the main picture on the bottom of your screen, but on the top right is the Mordax data, and this is just here to monitor the output of the sump pump, so we can kind of see the pumping effect that will happen to the Batumi signal, and also a module up here, which is out of shot on your screen and mine, but there is a Mother 32. Moog Mother 32 just up here on the left, top left of the shot. I'll be using that to swap over from the Batumi later on, so you can hear what an instrument or VCA with VCA gated, going into the sump pump does, and how the envelope follower follows a gated VCA differently to just a LFO saw wave pattern signal going into the sump pump instead, because there are differences, and it actually triggers the envelope in a different fashion, which you require to make the actual rhythmic stuff work better and get a bit more of an effect happening. So that's the housekeeping done. So what I'm going to do now, let's just move on to some audio. So what I've got, I'm going to turn on the saw wave. I'm just going to change the time of the data so we can, there we go, that's the saw wave there. So let's hear it. Now this saw wave is going into the sump pump and through the sump pump to the mixer. No, nothing else, no ducking, no pumping, no external triggers, nothing. So this is just the raw signal going through. So what we can do first is I can show you how the duck works. So I'm going to put in a four pattern trigger on the Euclidean, which will trigger the battering ram, and the envelope will come out and go into the sump pump and trigger the ducking, and we should hear that and see that on the data. I will keep the actual audio of the kick drum off for the moment, and so we can just hear the ducking pattern, the ducking happening. So here we go. Now you can clearly hear that ducking pattern, which is pretty cool. Now you might be able to hear a slight click on the audio, and that's because of the envelope shape of the kick itself. So if you used a kick with a longer decay, you'd probably have less of a click. Because we're sidechaining anyway, we're getting a sort of ducking effect. You would probably have a kick drum on at this point, so that click will disappear when the kick is kicking, so to speak. So I'm not really too worried about that. So let's hear that kick now. And as you can hear, that click just disappears. and it's sitting nicely in the ducking, in the gap made by the ducking, because obviously it is the envelope of the kicks. Sounds really good. Let's bring a hi-hat and a snare in so we just hear what that sounds like. And there we go, we just have a standard sidechain to the kick output effect that you could achieve with a different compressor. I own a Messor by Cosmotronic, so you could do that with a sidechain input as well, or an input from the kick drum, and you could get probably exactly the same effect. So nothing special. Let's bring the snare and hi-hat down, and the kick drum down a touch. Now, because we have a saw pattern coming in, I'm just going to bring the kick drum out. Because we have a saw wave coming through this, there is a envelope follower on the left channel, as I might have mentioned. So that is following the envelope of the saw wave. So if I bring up the threshold, which is here, I'm going to use my finger initially. Eventually, we should see the envelope triggered, which is the green light just below just in between the mode switch and the circuit level control here. So let's bring that up, and we should see the green light come on eventually, and you will hear it jump in volume slightly. Okay, so the volume is, I've managed to balance the volume correctly this time because it does jump slightly, but now we can hear that it sounds slightly distorted. And forgive me if I get this wrong, but I believe because because the envelope is now being triggered, and it's because it's a saw wave, the envelope is being triggered so rapidly that it kind of sounds like distortion, because it's just being rapidly triggered. Now if I bring the suppression up as well, that level comes up as we bring the envelope level upwards. And there we go, we come to 0 dB, which is the center line there, and we get a really cool sound anyway. We get a really cool effect. So let me bring the kick drum back in, and we hear that once again that the kick drum sits nicely around that effect. Now, as I mentioned before, because it's a constant audio, the wave is constant with no variable peaks or anything, it's not really going to trigger the envelope too well, because it's just not going above and below the threshold level at all. So you have to set that threshold level just on the very edge of the incoming source. But what we can do, let me take the kick away again. What we can do in this case, when you're using a external saw wave or sine wave or square wave, is we can use the engage input to actually engage to trigger the envelope manually. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to put a rhythm into the channel 2 of the Euclidean Circles, which is connected to the engage input in here, and we'll hear what that does. And there we go, we can hear that's manually triggering the envelope now, and it doesn't need the envelope follower of the left side to do that. To make that a bit clearer, let me stop the kick drum pattern, and we can hear that a lot clearer, and we can see that. Let me just change the data a bit tighter. There we go. So you can see with the peaks on the data, on the waveform, you can see it's opening the gate, and the volume is going up somewhat when that happens, and we get a rhythm. Now at this point, because we're triggering the envelope manually, what we can do is you can shape the envelope up here. So if I turn the release dial, it will actually keep the envelope open for longer. Sorry, my bad. It will keep the gate open for longer, so you'll get a more sustained sound rather than a short click. So let me do that. Now there is a point that I have to be, because we're right on the edge of the, let me turn the threshold down and turn the release up again. There we go. Now it is a very fine adjustment because we're using an oscillator, so it's adjusting the controls very finitely, because it's a delicate one, because otherwise it's just going to keep open or closed or shut, and then the release affects different things. And now you can see with the downward slope here on the end of that, we've actually got the release and actually releasing to make that more arrowhead shaped waveform on the data, and we can hear that happening, and we can see it also. You can see the light is actually releasing rather than straight stopping, which is quite interesting on this. So now I'm just going to bring back the kick drum pattern, the kick drum which is going to duck, and we'll get now a externally triggered envelope from the engage and a ducking sound, and it should make something quite interesting. Now, because I'm doing something quite techno here, I'm basically using a 7 over a 16th pattern. You'll get some off beat, sort of off kilter pattern, which is quite techno-y. And then I bring the kick drum back in. There we go, instant kind of like groove. That's instant, and there you go. It's really simple, but works really well. Let's bring a hi-hat and snare back in. And there you go, much better, like a quick groove, really cool. So now adjusting the envelope shape again, if we bring the release down, it should be a shorter period that the gate's open, so it should be more of an abrupt open and closing, which will be more of a clicky kind of staccato pattern. So let's do that. And there we go, so you can hear it now quickly opening and closing, which gets that, it makes it sound, yeah, really cool actually. Let's change the pattern itself. There we go. And there we go, so that is instant groove out of the Sump Pump using and remember it's a saw wave going into the input of the Sump Pump, manually triggered by the Euclidean circles, making this rhythm, along with the 4 on the floor ducking coming from the shack mat battery ram into the ducking input. So combining those 2 rhythmic patterns to get it all working really well, and then we're putting the 16th hi-hats and the snare on the 2 and 4 in, just to give it and bring the whole thing together. So really cool. So let's bring the snare and hi-hat out. Now what I'm going to do, I'm just going to flick it from gate to comp, and we're going to see what's going to happen. So I'm going to just turn before I do, I'm just going to take the external input out, but leave the ducking input in, and I'm going to switch it over now. And what we can see is it's totally changed the way the unit is working. So now, as the input signal goes over the threshold, the Sump Pump is now compressing the signal. So if I turn the threshold up, the light should start to go off, and we're going in. We should be kind of going into compression, so it should go down in volume. And it's a very delicate balance. And there we go. So if I adjust the release up and down, you can hear a very small adjustment of the release, and the attack will start to make it sound like it's pumping, like a compressor does when you do these sort of weird settings. Oh, sorry, when it's not weird, but those sort of settings, you can make it pump a lot more. Now, at this point, we can turn the whole circuit level up to get a bit more overdrive happening. And then we get into soft clip. Now I can bring that back down. We can also bring up the suppression compression control dial, which is the floor control, to do the same thing. But because it affects the circuit slightly differently, that you can still hear it's gone up, but it's actually inside that envelope. You can hear that it's gone up, but not the entire thing. Let's turn the level on that up, and as you can hear, then we got into much more obvious soft clipping. And then we adjust the threshold. And you can hear there's a point where we're actually just going between the top of the saw wave pattern. So it changes the tone entirely. And the light does flick slightly on and off. So let's go down, make sure that our attack and release are low. Bring that down a touch. Bring the floor control down a touch and the level control down. And let's bring the kick drum back in. And we're back to straight sidechain kick drum effect again, but in the compression mode. If I take the kick drum out, and now I'm going to introduce a rhythm on the external trigger input, the envelope trigger, we should have something interesting happen. And again, we have to bring the threshold up so it starts to, there we go. So we get a mix between the two. So essentially, because I brought it up, it's the same thing on as the gate when I had to bring it down to 0. So when you switch the switch, it inverts the threshold and which way around you need to do it. So if I bring that all the way up, we're now totally on manual input. On the gate, if I switch that quickly and I bring that all the way down, it's the same thing. So it flips the threshold and how the threshold dial works. Let's go back up to the center on the we've gone back into comp mode. Bring it up. And you can hear that nice clicking. So if I bring the release up, it should lengthen that. And you can see that on the screen. On the data, sorry. Let's bring the attack up a bit. And let's bring the kick drum back in. And the snare and hi-hat. And again, we're getting instant groove. Really cool. Really, really cool. And then I'm just gonna adjust the floor control. I'm gonna do this remotely so my hands are in the way. So I'm gonna bring the floor control up further. And the threshold up a bit. So I'm going to offset the threshold by putting the threshold down here and use my FAR to adjust the threshold. I'm bringing the threshold up via the CV input. I'm going to bring it further. And there we go. So now I'm going to lower the release again. It should be a shorter compression effect. There we go. Bring that down and use so I'm just externally controlling the floor control and the threshold now. So I'm just going to go up and down quite quickly on the threshold control, and you can hear. So by quickly going up and down the threshold, you get some really interesting effects happening. Turn the release and attack down to 0. And we've got the right balance. I'm just going to bring the release up a touch. And you can hear a very fine balance between all 4 controls will achieve significantly different results. So let's bring the hi-hat and snare out, and let's get the kick out, and I'm going to bring the level down. So that's been a saw wave into the sump pump, going through the sump pump effect, and then we've been manually triggering the envelope, and we've been using a 4-on-the-4 pattern to duck the entire thing as well at the same time, and we've achieved some really interesting results. I think really cool results. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch over to the Moog, and we're going to see what an instrument, I suppose, or would it be a gated VCA instrument would achieve instead, which has a much more variable wave. As you can see instantly as I switched over on the data, you can see the peaks and the peaks are much higher, so we would and more variable. So we'd expect the envelope follower to be able to follow the Moog envelope much better than when we put a constant saw wave in. So let me just bring the, make sure that the ducking is off and all the other effects are off. I'm going to put it into gate mode. So I'm going to reduce the threshold down to 0, to nothing. So it's the lowest it can be. And I'm going to bring the Moog up. And we'll hear what the Moog is doing. Something quite interesting. There we go. Now, just so you're aware, the Moog is running a 16th pattern with no changes, just a 16th pattern, nothing else. Let me just get a better sound. And it's sequenced, so it is running, so it might be something interesting in terms of the slight pulsing, but that's on every. Oh yeah, that's where the decay. I'm going to raise the decay. There we go. So it's a constant 16th pattern on the Moog. Nothing, the Mother 32. No sump pump in at all, and we've got rid of the Batumi. So let's put the pumping back in and see what the pumping's like. The pump function, the ducking function does on the sump pump. And there we go, instant ducking. Bring the kick drum in. I'm going to bring the frequency down a bit on the Moog. There we go. Super cool. So now what I'm going to do is, now we've got it pumped, we've got it ducking, just bring the threshold up so we start to trigger the envelope follower starts to trigger the envelope, and instantly, I didn't need to bring it up very far, it's already started to trigger it on those 16ths. Let me just bring the frequency of the Moog up a bit. There we go. There we go. Instantly, something a lot more interesting happening. So I'm going to bring a snare and hi-hat back in. And as you can hear, it's instantly cool. That's like, because that envelope, as you can see, is rapidly opening and closing rather than more constantly when we had a oscillator, a saw wave coming in. Much better, much more rhythmic. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to just change the envelope shape so we can change the how quickly the gate is opening and closing. So let's increase the release so the gate is open for longer. And you get a much more pulsy sound. It's really cool. And bring the attack up slightly. So it takes a touch longer for the gate to open. And let's just change the threshold slightly and see what happens. And that's on the very edge, so it is right on the edge. I'm going to lower the attack. Now, as you can see, I haven't even begun to incorporate a manual trigger engage on using the Euclidean. So let's engage the envelope manually as well and see what interesting combination of the envelope follower from the left channel plus the manual envelope trigger from the engage input does to what we're hearing. Now there is a pattern, but because I have to we've got to balance the threshold so it just is on the level of triggering that pattern, and there we go. And the envelope follower will trigger the envelope as well. So it's a very fine adjustment to get it just on the edge of both of those triggers. But yeah, once you've got it just right, you get this interesting combination of the two patterns happening. One for the envelope follower from the left channel input, and one from the manual envelope trigger. And there you go. It's really cool pattern. If I now change the manual trigger pattern, and also what I'm going to do now, because I have access to a decay on the Moog, I'm going to bring the decay down, see what happens there on the input signal. You can get a lot clickier if we lower the decay on the Moog, and bring the decay up. And we can get a really cool effect there. So bring the snare and hi-hat out again, and the kick drum out. And what we're going to do is I'm going to take away the manual trigger input and take away the ducking. I'm going to switch it into comp mode, and it instantly goes up. So then we need to bring the threshold up, so a touch, because we don't need to bring it up too much. There we go. So that's just triggering on the highest peak of the incoming the wave from the Mother 32. So what I'm now doing is put the ducking effect back in, and we're going to put a manual trigger in, and bring the kick, snare and hi-hat back in. Going to now drop the release, and on remotely just bring the threshold up a touch, just to get it just right remotely. I've just brought it so it's triggering from both inputs. So the side chain on the left channel, sorry, the envelope follower on the left channel, and the manual trigger input on the engage input. And then I'm just slightly adjusting just to get it just between the two. As you can hear, it's not always triggering. It's a very finite adjustment I'm doing. And I'm going to just change the release. And come down with the release a bit. So really cool, as you can see, a really cool effect, and it has a lot that you can do so much with it with different rhythmic patterns on the engage input trigger. Also, the content that you put in from the instrument, the source that you're putting in, and if it's more variable than what I've got here from the Mother 32, you can get different things going on as well. Now there is a side note, is I don't think you, oh no you do, I think in the manual you have to use a trigger or gate input on the engage input trigger. So it has to be a trigger or gate input here, but on the ducking input you can use a audio input, so you could use basically anything, so because it's an envelope follower, so to do the ducking effect. Now, as a final note, there is a port that I haven't used, which is just here, and that is a full fat plus envelope, so it doesn't go into minus, that you can come out of, and it's actually tapping it before the suppressive control, so you'll get a full level unattenuated envelope out signal from this to plug into something else to do some other interesting effects from the envelope follower circuit on the input channel here and the threshold circuit here. So I'm going to bring down the snare and hi-hat and bring down the level for a moment. So what I'm going to do now is just reduce these to 0, is I'm just going to show you and the demonstration of how the sidechain input on the left input works with a gate trigger from the Euclidean circles. So I'm going to unplug the Moog left channel that's going in there. I just need to switch my mixer into mono. There we go. And then I'm going to take a cable, which is here. I'm going to put an orange cable into channel 3 of the Euclidean circles, plug that into the left channel of the sump pump. I'm going to dial in a, let's just do a full 16th pattern into the channel 3, and now I'm going to bring up the Moog again. Let's see what that's doing. But with this I will have to adjust the threshold in a way that it picks up that pattern, and I think it might already be doing that. Yeah, it is. So if I'd reduce the length of the pattern, we should hear if I do a different length. So that's a 7 again, and I'm going to reduce that down to not everything. There you go. That's the pattern from the side chaining input on the left side. Now if I bring the kick back in, oh, can I hear the kick? Oh, sorry, I haven't engaged the kick, so I'm going to just put the ducking back in. And there we got the ducking and the side chain input here, and bring the kick back in. And I'm now going to incorporate another pattern again from the engage input. So I'm going to do channel 2 of the Euclidean whilst it's side chaining from channel 3 and see what happens. And muck about with the threshold a bit. I'm going to do that remotely so my fingers are out of the way. And the overall level, and bring this snare and hi-hat back in. And adjust the engage input trigger. And adjust the release and attack of touch. So you can see you can actually incorporate two different sidechain rhythms, or two patterns, sorry. A sidechain pattern from a source here on channel 3 in this case, and a engage input, which is the actual envelope trigger, which has to be a trigger input of 5 volts from the channel 2 here, to do a cross rhythm of the two, which is much more abrupt and much more sharp because they're both 5 volt triggers rather than an audio input source or envelope followed source, which is coming in on the left side. So you get a much more rhythmic pattern if you wanted to achieve something like that. And then a bit of an adjustment on the release. So no release. And 10 o'clock on the release. No attack. And there we go, and that's on the compression side. So if let's just see what happens if I switch it into gate and see if what happens. Change the threshold. Change the threshold on my. I have to bring the threshold right down because it is a 5 volt trigger and sidechain input, so it's a quite aggressive trigger pattern that's happening, and we can get the similar results. Close the release down to nothing. Open the release to touch. There we go. Because we're using a 5 volt trigger pulse to do the side chaining and the manual gate envelope triggering, it's a very quick impulse, so you would need to raise the release up a bit more so the gates well, in this case the gate circuit remains open for slightly longer so you can hear the rhythm. If you close the release right down, it gets very short, so it is there but it's almost imperceivable. So we need to bring the release up a touch so you can hear that gate open for long enough, and you can also see that it's open longer on the light here. So what I'm going to do now, whilst that is going, is just to show the difference of the sidechain from a pulse or triggers input to an audio envelope followed input. So I'm going to pull out the channel 3 from the Euclidean, put back the Moog signal, and as you can hear, it goes back to being a lot rounder sounding and a bit more organic sounding rather than harsh, kind of an aggressive industrial kind of click. So I'm just going to take the hi-hat and snare out and the kick and bring this down. And that has been my demo of the Sump Pump and how you can incorporate this, how incorporating this into your skiff or your rack would give this sort of effect. I've done it just using the kick drum and external pulse triggers because this is the way I use it, and it gives you that, like, it's really good for techno and that sort of techno, hard techno, industrial sort of music that you require to sidechain a kick drum over your source so you can hear the kick pattern. By all means, you can use different different sidechain envelope followed sources, and also you don't have to use a kick drum. You could use something else to do the ducking on the duck input. I've just used this as a demo case point that how the way I use it. And yes, thank you very much for watching my video. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope you've gleaned some useful information. As a side point, if I've misspoken about how this has worked in terms of compression and gating, my apologies. It's quite a complicated thing to try and explain. And I do know about thresholds, but in this case, it's doing some very interesting things with the adjustments of all four controls. So it does get a bit confusing at times. But once again, thank you for watching. Thank you for taking the time to watch my video. I hope it's been enjoyable. And please come back and watch some more of my jams and videos when I release them. Thank you very much.